April 30th, 1943. London, England. The temperature was 12 degrees Celsius and rain was falling steadily when Major John Patterson sat in a briefing room at Admiralty headquarters and learned about the dead man who was going to help win the war. Patterson was 33 years old, a Canadian Army intelligence officer assigned to liaison duty with British intelligence, and he had spent 2 years analysing German defensive capabilities without encountering anything as bizarre as what he was hearing now. A British naval intelligence officer named Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague stood at the front of the room, describing an operation that sounded more like crime fiction than military planning. They were going to take a corpse, dress it as a Royal Marines officer, attach a briefcase containing false invasion plans to its wrist, and dump it off the coast of Spain, where German intelligence would find it and believe the false plans were real. John Patterson came from Toronto, Ontario. His father was a lawyer with a downtown firm. Patterson grew up in comfortable middle-class circumstances, attended the University of Toronto, and studied history with focus on military campaigns. He joined the Canadian Army in 1939 when war began and was commissioned as an intelligence officer because he spoke German and French fluently and had academic background in military history. By April 1943, he had been working in intelligence for 4 years, mostly analysing German order of battle and defensive preparations. He was good at his work, but found it tedious. Counting German divisions and tracking unit movements was important, but not particularly interesting. The briefing he was attending promised to be different. Montague explained Operation Mincemeat's logic. The Allies were planning to invade Sicily in July 1943. This invasion was predictable because Sicily was the obvious next step after North Africa. The Germans knew this. They were reinforcing Sicily. The Allies needed the Germans to divert forces away from Sicily to defend somewhere else. The solution was to convince the Germans the actual invasion target was Greece, not Sicily. If the Germans believed Greece was the target, they would move divisions from Sicily to Greece. Then, when the Allies invaded Sicily, German defenses would be weaker than expected. But how do you convince enemy intelligence that your invasion target is somewhere other than the obvious location? Montague explained that German intelligence trusted documents more than agent reports. If the Germans captured actual Allied planning documents describing an invasion of Greece, they would believe those documents. The challenge was getting authentic-looking documents into German hands without making it obvious the documents were planted. That's where the corpse came in. The plan was to obtain a body, dress it as a Royal Marines courier, and attach a briefcase containing letters from senior Allied officers discussing invasion plans for Greece. The body would be released from a submarine off the coast of Spain. Spain was neutral but sympathetic to Germany. Spanish authorities would find the body and notify the Germans. German intelligence would photograph the documents, analyze them, and conclude they had discovered actual Allied invasion plans. The Germans would reinforce Greece. The Allies would invade Sicily against weaker defenses. Patterson listened to this explanation with growing disbelief. He understood the strategic logic. Deception was valuable. Diverting German forces from the real invasion site would save Allied lives. But the method seemed absurdly complex and dependent on too many assumptions. What if the Spanish didn't find the body? What if they found it but didn't notify the Germans? What if the Germans analyzed the documents and concluded they were fake? What if the body decomposed too much to be credible? Montague seemed to have considered all these objections and had answers for each. The body would be released close enough to shore that currents would carry it to land within 24 hours. Spanish fishermen operated in that area constantly. Discovery was nearly certain. Spanish authorities had a pattern of cooperating with German intelligence. They would notify the Germans. The documents would be created by actual Allied staff officers using authentic letterhead, authentic signature styles, and authentic concerns. German document analysis would find nothing suspicious, because nothing was suspicious except the content being false. The body would be preserved using dry ice during transport to prevent decomposition. Every detail had been planned. Patterson asked why he was being briefed on this operation. Montague explained that Patterson's role was to serve as Canadian liaison, monitoring the operation and providing analysis of how German intelligence might respond. Patterson had expertise in German intelligence methods from his work analyzing their order of battle assessments. Montague wanted Patterson's assessment of whether German intelligence would believe documents found on a corpse washed up in Spain. Patterson thought carefully. German intelligence was professional and skeptical, but they also trusted documentary evidence and had a pattern of believing information that confirmed their existing suspicions. If the documents suggested Greece as invasion target, the Germans might believe it because Greece was a plausible target. Sicily was obvious. Greece was less obvious, but still strategic. The Germans might prefer to believe the less obvious target was real. Patterson told Montague he thought German intelligence would probably believe the documents if they appeared authentic and if the cover story was credible. Montague asked what would make the cover story credible. Patterson said the body needed to have a plausible reason for carrying invasion planning documents. The documents needed to appear accidental discovery rather than deliberate plant. The timing needed to align with actual Allied planning cycles. If all these factors aligned, German intelligence would probably accept the documents as genuine. Montague seemed satisfied with this assessment and invited Patterson to observe the operation's preparation in detail. Over the next 2 weeks, Patterson became intimately familiar with the most elaborate identity fabrication he had ever encountered. The operation required transforming an anonymous corpse into a believable Royal Marines officer with a complete life history. Every detail of Major William Martin's existence had to be created from nothing and had to withstand German counterintelligence scrutiny. Patterson's first involvement was attending a meeting on March 22, 1943, at a London coroner's office. Montague had arranged to meet with Bentley Purchase, the coroner for the St Pancras district. Purchase was 58 years old and had been coroner for 20 years. He understood that some bodies went unclaimed because the deceased had no family or the family couldn't afford burial. He also understood, though it was never stated explicitly, that the British government occasionally needed unclaimed bodies for purposes that were classified. Purchase didn't ask questions. He just verified that the body would be treated respectfully, even if its use was unconventional. Montague explained to Purchase that they needed a body of a man approximately 30 to 40 years old who had died from causes that wouldn't be obvious upon external examination. The body would be presented as someone who died in an aircraft crash over water. External injuries consistent with drowning were acceptable. Internal injuries that clearly indicated other causes of death were not. Purchase said he would check his records and contact Montague if suitable bodies became available. Patterson asked Montague after the meeting why aircraft crash was the cover story. Montague explained that aircraft carrying classified documents between London and Allied headquarters in North Africa occasionally crashed. This was known to German intelligence. A courier dying in such a crash and washing up on the Spanish coast was implausible, but not impossible. The implausibility actually helped the deception. If the Germans thought the British would never deliberately stage something so implausible, they might conclude it was genuine. On March 26th, Purchase contacted Montague. A suitable body was available. Glyndwr Michael, age 34, homeless vagrant, died on January 28th from ingesting rat poison containing phosphorus. The phosphorus had caused liver failure, but left no external marks. The body had been kept in cold storage pending identification or burial arrangements. No family had claimed it. Purchase could release the body for government use if handled through proper channels. Patterson attended the formal identification on March 28th. He, Montague, and a Royal Air Force pathologist examined Michael's body at the mortuary. The pathologist confirmed the body showed no obvious external signs of phosphorus poisoning. There was some decomposition, but preservation in cold storage had kept it minimal. With proper treatment, the body could appear to have been in cold seawater for 24 to 48 hours, consistent with drowning after aircraft crash. Patterson looked at Glyndwr Michael's face and felt uncomfortable. This was a real person who had lived a difficult life and died accidentally. Now his body would be used as a prop in military deception. Patterson understood the strategic necessity, but the human reality bothered him.
The body was transferred to a facility where it could be prepared for deployment. The preparation involved dressing the body in Royal Marines uniform with proper rank insignia for a major, adding personal effects that would create a believable identity, and preserving the body so it would remain intact until discovery. Patterson observed each step of this preparation and analysed it from German counterintelligence perspective. The uniform was authentic, obtained from Royal Marines stores. The rank badges were properly sewn. The boots were worn, not new, suggesting the officer had worn them before. Patterson examined the uniform and found no anomalies. A German examiner would find standard British military issue in correct configuration for a Royal Marines major. This checked out. The personal effects were more complex. Montagu's team had created an entire fictional life for Major William Martin. Patterson reviewed each element. Identity documents. Major William Martin's military ID card dated 1942 with photograph. The photograph was actually of a Royal Marines officer who resembled the corpse and had agreed to pose for the fake ID. The card showed appropriate stamps and wear consistent with a year of use. Patterson examined the ID under magnification. The printing matched British military ID card standards. The photograph showed proper uniform and insignia. A German examiner checking this against British ID samples would find it authentic. Personal letters. 2 love letters, supposedly from Martin's fiancée, a woman named Pam. The letters were written by a young British intelligence officer's secretary who had agreed to create a fictional persona. The letters discussed wedding plans, mentioned Martin's parents, fictional, complained about rationing, and expressed concern about Martin's safety. The handwriting was feminine and consistent across both letters. The paper was cheap wartime stationery, available in any British shop. Patterson read the letters carefully. They sounded authentic. Real couples in wartime wrote exactly this kind of letter. Mundane concerns mixed with affection and worry. A German analyst reading these would conclude Martin had a fiancée and was planning marriage. This added human dimension to the identity. Photograph of fiancée. A small photograph of Pam in Martin's wallet. The photograph was actually of an intelligence office clerk who had posed in civilian clothes. She was attractive, but not remarkably so. An ordinary girlfriend's photograph. Patterson examined it and noted it looked like thousands of other girlfriend photographs British soldiers carried. Nothing suspicious. Receipts and personal items. Ticket stubs from a London theatre dated March 1943, showing Martin attended a play. A receipt for an engagement ring purchased from a London jeweller, dated March 19, 1943. A receipt from a gentleman's club for dinner and drinks. All of these were genuine receipts obtained by Montagu's team from the actual establishments. Patterson verified each against his knowledge of British commercial documents. A German analyst could check the theatre performance schedule and confirm that play was showing on that date. Could verify the jeweller existed at that address. Could confirm the club was a real establishment. Every detail was checkable and correct. Cigarettes and matches. A pack of Players' cigarettes, half empty, in Martin's pocket. A book of matches from a London pub. These were trivial details, but important. Real people carried half-used cigarettes and random matches. Fabricated identities often missed these mundane touches. Patterson noted that Montagu's team had understood this. The cigarettes and matches made Martin's seem real because they were unremarkable. Patterson spent 3 days analysing every aspect of Major Martin's created identity and found it nearly perfect.
His only concern was the engagement ring receipt. It was dated March 19th, 1943, just 11 days before the operation launch date. This was cutting it close. If Germans checked when the ring was purchased and compared it to when Martin's body was found, they might notice the short time interval and question why a man who just bought an engagement ring was flying to North Africa. Patterson raised this concern with Montague. Montague acknowledged the timeline was tight, but said it actually helped the cover story. Martin was flying to North Africa precisely because he had just gotten engaged and wanted to complete his assignment quickly so he could return to Britain and get married. The haste explained why he was carrying documents personally rather than waiting for secure courier. The engagement ring receipt actually strengthened the cover story by providing motive for Martin's urgency. Patterson accepted this logic, but remained slightly uncomfortable with the timeline. The final element of preparation was the briefcase and documents. Patterson attended the drafting session for the letters that would be attached to Martin's body. 2 letters were created. Letter 1. From Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of Allied Forces in North Africa. The letter discussed operational planning and mentioned that Admiral Andrew Cunningham would command the Greece invasion force. It mentioned almost casually that Sicily would be used as a cover operation to deceive the Germans into thinking Sicily was the real target, when actually Greece was the real target. The letter was written in Nye's casual correspondence style, including a joke about sardines in a Sardinia context and personal remarks about mutual colleagues. The tone was exactly what a senior British officer would use writing to another senior officer about classified matters. Letter 2. From Admiral Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Andrew Cunningham. This letter introduced Major Martin as a courier and mentioned that Martin was an expert on amphibious operations who could provide Cunningham with valuable insights. The letter's real purpose was to explain why Martin was carrying the Nye Alexander letter. Martin was supposedly hand-delivering correspondence from London to Allied headquarters. This cover story explained the document's presence. Patterson read both letters multiple times. He analyzed them from German intelligence perspective. Would a German analyst believe these were authentic? Patterson thought yes, for several reasons. The letters contained specific named operations: Operation Husky, Sicily, and Operation Brimstone, Greece. These operation names sounded authentic because they matched British naming conventions. The letters referenced real officers in appropriate positions. The tone was casual and professional, matching how senior British officers actually corresponded. The letters included mundane details like Nye's joke about sardines. Real correspondence included such details. Fabricated correspondence usually didn't. Patterson's only concern was that the letters stated the deception too explicitly. They specifically said Sicily was a cover for Greece. This seemed almost too obvious. Patterson mentioned this to Montague. Montague explained that German intelligence expected British communications to discuss deception planning. The British were known for using deception. If the letters mentioned deception but identified the wrong target as real, Germans might assume the British were being honest about their deception planning while actually being deceived about what the real target was. The meta-deception was that the letters acknowledged using Sicily as cover, which made Germans think Greece was real, when actually Sicily was real and Greece was the cover. The complexity of this layered deception made Patterson's head hurt, but he acknowledged it was clever. On April 17th, all elements of Major Martin's identity were finalized. Patterson reviewed the complete package: body preserved and dressed in uniform, identity documents in pockets, love letters in wallet, engagement ring receipt showing recent purchase, theatre tickets, cigarettes, matches, briefcase chained to wrist containing the 2 letters with false invasion plans. Every detail was authentic, except the content being false. Patterson wrote his final assessment for Montague. German intelligence will analyze every element of this package. They will find authentic documents, authentic personal effects, and authentic physical evidence. Unless they imagine that British intelligence would create an entirely fictional identity using a corpse as delivery mechanism, they will conclude the documents are genuine. I assess 75% probability that Germans will believe the deception. Montague thanked Patterson for the assessment and noted it was consistent with his own expectations. The operation would proceed. On April 19th, the body of Glyndwr Michael, now dressed as Major William Martin with a complete fictional identity, was packed in dry ice inside a sealed canister and transported to Scotland, where it would be loaded onto HMS Seraph for deployment off the Spanish coast. Patterson watched the canister being loaded onto a military truck for transport north. Inside that canister was a dead vagrant from Wales, transformed into a Royal Marines major who never existed. The transformation had required hundreds of hours of work, creating identity documents, writing love letters, purchasing theatre tickets, and analysing German counterintelligence methods. All of this effort to make a corpse tell a believable lie. Patterson understood the strategic necessity. He also understood the operation's success depended on Germans never imagining that anyone would go to this much effort to create a fake identity for a dead body. The audacity of the deception was both its greatest strength and its most disturbing aspect. On April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph, a British submarine, left Holy Loch in Scotland, carrying the body of Glyndwr Michael, dressed as Major William Martin. Patterson was not aboard the submarine. His role was to monitor the operation from London and analyze German response once the documents were discovered. The submarine reached the Spanish coast near Huelva on April 30th. At 0430 hours on that morning, the crew placed Major Martin's body into the water, approximately 1 mile offshore. The body was weighted to float rather than sink. Currents carried it toward shore. At 0930 hours, a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria found the body floating near the beach and notified local authorities. Spanish authorities recovered the body and the attached briefcase. They notified the British Vice Consul in Huelva, as required by international protocol for bodies of foreign nationals. They also notified German intelligence, as Patterson had predicted. The German intelligence officer in Huelva, Adolf Klaus, immediately recognized the potential importance of documents attached to a British military courier. He photographed the documents before returning them to British authorities. The photographs were transmitted to Berlin for analysis. German intelligence analysts examined the documents carefully. They noted the authentic letterhead, authentic signatures, and authentic tone. They concluded the documents were genuine Allied planning materials. The documents indicated Greece and Sardinia as invasion targets, with Sicily as a feint. Patterson monitored this analysis through British signals intelligence intercepts. The British had broken German Enigma codes and could read German military communications. German messages about the documents indicated they believed the invasion would target Greece. German forces began redeploying from Sicily to Greece in early May 1943. By mid-May, 2 German divisions had moved from Sicily to Greece. Additional forces were being prepared for deployment. The deception was working exactly as planned. Patterson filed intelligence reports tracking German redeployment. His reports noted that German defensive preparations in Sicily were being reduced, while preparations in Greece intensified. This suggested the Germans believed the false documents. Patterson calculated that if the Sicily invasion occurred with current German defensive strength, Allied casualties would be approximately 25 to 30% lower than if Germans had maintained full defensive strength in Sicily. This wasn't just successful deception. This was deception that would save thousands of Allied lives. On July 10, 1943, Allied forces invaded Sicily. German defenses were substantial, but not as strong as they would have been without the deception. 2 divisions that would have defended Sicily were in Greece, defending against an invasion that never came. The Sicily invasion succeeded with casualties lower than initial estimates. Patterson's calculation of 25 to 30% casualty reduction proved roughly accurate. Post-invasion analysis estimated approximately 3,000 to 4,000 Allied lives were saved by the weakened German defenses resulting from Operation Mincemeat's success. Patterson continued his intelligence work through 1944 and 1945. He never mentioned Operation Mincemeat in his regular reports. The operation remained classified at the highest level. After the war ended in May 1945, Patterson returned to Canada. He was demobilized in September 1945 and returned to Toronto. He got a job teaching history at the University of Toronto. He taught military history courses and occasionally mentioned that he had worked in intelligence during the war, but provided no details. Operation Mincemeat remained classified. Patterson honored the classification and said nothing. In 1953, a book titled The Man Who Never Was published in Britain. The author was Ewan Montague, who described Operation Mincemeat in detail. The book revealed the operation publicly for the first time. Montague described planning the operation, creating Major Martin's identity, deploying the body, and analyzing German response. The book became a bestseller. It was adapted into a film in 1956. Operation Mincemeat became one of the most famous deception operations of World War II. Patterson read the book and watched the film. Neither mentioned Canadian involvement because no official Canadian involvement existed. Patterson's liaison role had been informal and undocumented. In 1957, Patterson received a letter from Montague asking if they could correspond about the operation from Patterson's perspective. Montague was writing a more detailed account and wanted to include analysis of German intelligence response. Patterson agreed to correspond. They exchanged letters for 2 years. Patterson described his analysis of why German intelligence believed the documents. He explained that Germans trusted documentary evidence more than agent reports. They had a pattern of believing information that aligned with plausible strategic alternatives. Greece was plausible. Therefore, documents suggesting Greece were believable. Montague asked if Patterson thought the operation's success was inevitable or fortunate. Patterson said neither. It was well planned and well executed, but it also required German intelligence to make specific analytical decisions that could have gone differently. If they had been more skeptical about documents found on a body, if they had questioned why a courier carried invasion planning documents rather than using secure communication channels, if they had investigated Major Martin's background more thoroughly and discovered he didn't exist, any of these alternative decisions would have revealed the deception. The operation succeeded because the Germans made decisions that seemed reasonable, but were wrong. Montague asked if Patterson felt the operation was morally acceptable, given it used a dead person's body without family consent. Patterson had thought about this question for years. Glyndwr Michael was dead from an accidental poisoning. His death was tragic. We used his body to save thousands of living soldiers. I don't know if he would have consented if asked, but I think most people would consent to their body being used to save thousands of lives if they were asked posthumously. This doesn't make it clearly right, but it makes it less clearly wrong. They discussed the ethical complexity of the operation for several letters. Montague admitted he had occasional discomfort about using Michael's body. Patterson admitted similar discomfort. Neither could resolve the ethical question definitively. They agreed that wartime necessity justified actions that peacetime ethics might not justify. This didn't eliminate the ethical complexity. It just acknowledged that war creates situations where all available choices have ethical problems, and you choose the least problematic option. In 1968, a German military historian named Dr. Wilhelm Schmidt published a book analyzing German intelligence failures during World War II. The book included a chapter about Operation Mincemeat. Schmidt had access to German intelligence files and described how German analysts examined the documents found on Major Martin, concluded they were genuine, and recommended redeploying forces to Greece. Schmidt wrote that German intelligence had made a fundamental analytical error. They assumed documents found by chance were necessarily authentic. They hadn't seriously considered that the documents might be deliberately planted. The possibility was mentioned in one internal memo, but dismissed as unlikely because the British would not use a corpse for deception purposes. Patterson read Schmidt's book and wrote to him asking if they could correspond. Schmidt agreed. They exchanged letters for 5 years. Schmidt asked Patterson to explain from Allied intelligence perspective how the deception was designed to exploit German analytical patterns. Patterson explained that British intelligence understood Germans' trusted documents more than agent reports. They designed the deception to provide documentary evidence in a format Germans would trust. The body was the delivery mechanism. The documents were the weapon. The Germans' own analytical preferences made them vulnerable to this specific deception method. Schmidt asked if Patterson thought German analysts were incompetent for believing the documents. Patterson said no. They were competent analysts making reasonable judgments based on available information. The documents appeared authentic because they were authentic, except for the content being false. The discovery circumstances appeared accidental because they were designed to appear accidental. German analysts did everything correctly, except imagine that British intelligence would use a corpse to deliver false documents. This wasn't analytical failure. This was failure of imagination about what the enemy might do. Schmidt asked what lessons German intelligence should have learned from this failure. Patterson said, "Distrust all information that seems too valuable. If you discover the enemy's invasion plans by accident, you probably didn't discover them by accident. Either the enemy wanted you to discover them, or the information is less valuable than it appears." German intelligence trusted the Mincemeat documents because they seemed valuable. They should have distrusted them for exactly that reason. In 1975, Schmidt traveled to Toronto to meet Patterson. Schmidt was 62 years old. Patterson was 65. They met at Patterson's house and spent an afternoon discussing the operation from opposing perspectives. Schmidt brought copies of German intelligence analysis from 1943, showing how they assessed the Mincemeat documents. Patterson looked at the analysis and saw how thoroughly the Germans had examined the documents. They had verified the letterhead, analyzed the handwriting, checked the signatures against known examples, and examined the paper and ink. Every technical test confirmed authenticity. The Germans had done excellent forensic analysis. They just didn't imagine the British would create technically perfect false documents attached to a corpse. Patterson asked if knowing about British willingness to use corpses for deception would have changed German analytical approach. Schmidt said yes. If we had imagined this possibility, we would have questioned why a courier carried such important documents physically rather than using encrypted communications. We would have investigated Major Martin's background more thoroughly. We would have asked why the plane supposedly crashed but left the body intact enough to recover. All these questions have answers that reveal the deception. But we never asked the questions because we didn't imagine corpse-based deception was possible. They discussed whether Schmidt felt angry about being deceived. Schmidt said no. We were at war. Both sides used deception. The British used it more effectively than we defended against it. That's just fact. Being angry about losing to a better deception is pointless. I would prefer to understand how the deception worked so future intelligence analysts don't make the same mistakes. Patterson appreciated this perspective. You're treating the deception as a professional problem rather than a personal offense. That's the right approach. We were both professionals doing our jobs. Your job was preventing Allied invasion. My job was helping Allied invasion succeed. We used deception. You failed to detect it. These are just facts. Schmidt asked Patterson if he felt proud of Operation Mincemeat's success. Patterson thought carefully. Pride is complicated. I feel satisfied that the deception worked and saved Allied lives. I feel uncomfortable about using a dead man's body without his consent. I feel uncertain about whether the operation's success was primarily good planning or fortunate German decisions. All these feelings coexist. Pride seems too simple for what actually happened. Schmidt said he understood this complexity. War creates situations where you do things that achieve good results through questionable methods. The results justify the methods strategically, but not necessarily ethically. You live with both the results and the methods. Sometimes the satisfaction about results doesn't eliminate discomfort about methods. Patterson agreed. That's exactly right. I've spent 32 years thinking about this operation. I'm still not sure how I feel about it morally. I'm sure it worked. I'm sure it saved lives. I'm not sure that makes it clearly right. They corresponded until Schmidt died in 1989 at age 76. Patterson died in 1995 at age 85. His obituary in the Toronto Star mentioned his long teaching career at the University of Toronto and his service in military intelligence during World War II, but did not mention Operation Mincemeat, because Patterson had never publicly discussed his role. The obituary was brief and would not have indicated to readers that the deceased had played any role in one of the war's most famous deception operations. The lesson from Operation Mincemeat is not primarily about deception tactics or intelligence operations. It is about the relationship between meticulous preparation and operational success. The operation succeeded because every detail of Major William Martin's identity was created with extraordinary care. The uniform was authentic. The ID was authentic.
The love letters sounded real because they included mundane details real letters would include. The theatre tickets and engagement ring receipt were genuine items obtained from actual establishments. The briefcase documents were written in authentic bureaucratic style by people who wrote such documents regularly. This attention to detail made the deception nearly undetectable. German intelligence analysts found nothing suspicious because nothing was suspicious at the technical level. The only way to detect the deception was to imagine that British intelligence would go to extraordinary lengths to create a completely fictional identity for a corpse. Most intelligence analysts wouldn't imagine this because it seemed absurdly elaborate. The Germans didn't imagine it. They analyzed the evidence they found, concluded it was authentic, and made strategic decisions based on that conclusion. Those decisions were wrong, but they were based on reasonable analysis of deceptive evidence. The ethical questions about using Glyndwr Michael's body remain unresolved. Michael died accidentally. He had no family to consent to his body's use. British intelligence used his body to save thousands of Allied soldiers. This achieved a good result through ethically questionable means. The result doesn't erase the ethical question. The ethical question doesn't negate the result. Both exist simultaneously without clean resolution. Patterson's years of preparation, analyzing Major Martin's fabricated identity, gave him unique insight into the operation's success. He had examined every receipt, every letter, every personal item, and asked himself, would this fool German counterintelligence? The answer was yes, because the items weren't just authentic looking, they were actually authentic. The receipts were real receipts from real establishments. The letters were written by someone who could write convincing love letters. The photograph was an actual photograph. The only fictional element was Major Martin himself. Everything about him was real, except his existence. That paradox made the deception work. How do you detect a fictional person when everything about them is authentic except the person himself? Patterson carried this knowledge for 52 years. He knew how the deception was built, detail by detail. He knew why it worked. He knew it saved thousands of lives. He also knew it used a dead vagrant without consent. All of these facts coexisted. Patterson never resolved them into simple moral categories. The operation was simultaneously brilliant, effective, necessary, and ethically troubling. Sometimes that's what warfare produces. Operations that save lives through methods that raise ethical questions. and both facts matter equally, and neither fact makes the other fact less important.